A will is the final official statement of your intentions. But what if it doesn't say clearly enough what those intentions are? Or if you never even write down what you really want to happen after your death?
He never spoke about making a will, and I certainly never asked him. You don't think about dying for a young man, do you?
If David is looking down on us, he'd be bloody angry right now.
What is the crime for which I've been summoned to court? And that is apparently to inherit money.
Match day at Salcombe Rugby Club in South Devon. Since it was founded over 100 years ago, it has prided itself on being a family club and an important part of town life. But 3 years ago, a dispute kicked off, which was as hard fought as anything seen on the pitch. It has sent ripples through the local community and brought the family of a former player, Peter Allen, into direct conflict with the club itself.
Our policy all along has been we want to respect Pete's wishes. Pete was a member of our club. He wrote his will, and he wrote it in such a way that he wanted to leave a bequest to the club.
Oh, I think they're diabolical. My family and my friends said what they've done is obscene, and I think that covers it. This one is Peter taken at a hotel in Plymouth. They had a sergeant's mess do. Those are his parachute wings, and that little dagger there means that he was a commando.
Peter Allen was a man of action. After leaving school at 16, he joined the army.
He loved the life. The rougher it was, the more dangerous it was, the better he liked it. He just seemed to thrive on danger.
When he came home from the army, he was straight in to see me in our house. He spent as much time in our house as he did in his own. But we did everything together. We fished, we went shooting, we played golf, and but most of all was the rugby club. It was his great passion, rugby club, and that's where we spent most of our time, really.
Peter and Tony had played rugby together since childhood, and although Peter's army career often took him away from home, the club was always one of his first ports of call when he came back on leave.
He played with his peers. A lot of people he went to school with and people he grew up with played here. And there was that kind of bond, and I think Pete enjoyed being with the people he knew particularly well. He had some very close friends within the rugby club, and I think it was part of his family, I think, really, the club, in all fairness.
But as he rose through the army ranks, Peter was spending less time in the field and more behind a desk. So he left to pursue a new ambition: clearing landmines in trouble spots around the world. Whilst he waited for the right job to come up, he returned to his hometown of Salcombe and worked as a builder with his friend Tony.
He'd almost made the decision to give up, applying for that, and to concentrate on the building with myself. And then suddenly he had a phone call, and that was it. He didn't look back, really. And off he went to Angola.
Peter had been offered a mine clearance job in Angola by a company called Greenfield. His decision to accept was to have dramatic consequences for everyone closest to him, including his family and the rugby club.
By having this job of clearing mines in Angola, that's what he trained for, and at the same time he was going to help people, and that's what he strived to do.
After 4 months in Angola, Peter came home on leave. He'd only been back 3 days when Robin received some bad news.
I had a phone call at home, late afternoon, early evening. I can't even remember who it was from now, just saying that Peter had been involved in this accident.
Most of the motorbikers, they meet on the quay, and the coach was going to a rugby practice, and they said, "Come on, Pete, you come with us." "No," he says, I'm going to see the Red Arrows at Dartmouth." 6 of them went to the Red Arrows, and that was it. They never got there.
Peter died in a motorcycle accident on the narrow lanes near his parents' home. He was 32 years old.
I actually phoned Tony Paul, who was probably Pete's best friend. I think Tony was having a barbecue at the time, which is not very nice news to break to him. And then really a lot of people came down the club that evening and were absolutely in total shock. It absolutely devastated everyone.
After the funeral, the rugby club held a wake for Peter.
They offered to provide the wake. It seemed a natural place to go, actually, rather than come here into the village and have it in this the hall here.
He would have wanted everybody to have a beer at the club on his behalf. And several weeks later, we actually had a ceremony on the pitch where we scattered his ashes. That's what Peter had said he wanted, and that's what we did in respect to Pete. And a lot of people turned up for that.
Up to now, Peter's parents and the club had been united in grief, but an unexpected revelation was about to change everything. Before he went to Angola, Peter's employers had taken out an insurance policy for him in case of death. Company rules also required that he make a will.
It was on a proper will paper, but of course it wasn't sanctioned by a solicitor because this was out in the field, so to speak. And I think, quite honestly, he didn't remember everything that he had. The first and second parts of the will are quite clear, but the third part was a bit vague, and this is where all the problems have come about.
Although Peter's will was written in the field, it was still legally valid. In the first 2 sections, he left money to family and friends, but in clause 3, he wrote that any outstanding insurances should go to the rugby club. This didn't surprise his friend Stuart, who had also acted as Peter's financial advisor.
He made it quite clear what his wishes would be, and he made it clear on a number of occasions, both to myself and Tony, who's his other friend. And you know, his intention was this: is that you know, he suggested that he ought to leave some money to his mother and father, leave some money to the rugby club, and that was it, really.
Peter had left several insurance policies, but it was the big one taken out by his employers in Angola which was to be the focus of the dispute between his parents and the club.
I remember when I heard about it, the secretary of the club phoned me. He'd heard from our solicitors that the amount actually talking about was £250,000, and just absolutely gobsmacked that there was that amount of money. With no one ever having dealt with this situation before, we just expected that it would be like a normal will, and through whatever means the club, within a short amount of time, would end up with a substantial amount of money. And the big decision then was, what do we do with this money?
Although the club assumed the £250,000 was theirs, Peter's brother Paul, the executor of the will, was advised by his lawyers that in fact the policy might not be covered by clause 3, in which case it should go to his parents instead.
Paul's argument as the executor, and bearing in mind that he was only the executor and sort of acting for his parents, was that the Greenfield contract, should we call it, was not in fact a life assurance policy, but was a sort of death grant or death in service benefit. Basically the family were challenging the rugby club as to whether this was a life assurance policy or not.
The solicitor informed us that Salcombe Rugby Club wanted this life policy. So of course I'm afraid I stuck my heel then.
But behind the legal debate lay a more basic human question. To whom did Peter really intend to leave the money?
Pete had said to people, if anything ever happened to him, then the club will be well looked after. I don't think that's a secret. I have to say honestly, he never said that to me, but he said it to other people, and a lot of people in the club will vouch for that.
Peter had shared his dreams for the club with his good friends Stuart and Tony.
This area of the club, there used to be an old rifle range here that has now been knocked down. As you can see, a load of sort of brambles and very much overgrown. But this is one of the areas that Pete had always thought of, always liked to think that if the club ever came into a sum of money that could be developed, and the club actually owned the strip of land right up to the clubhouse.
It's got plenty of potential to turn into, well, he said squash rooms or snooker place, or even stands around the club as well. That was, you know, he just had great ideas. He was always that type of person.
He was,
wasn't he?
yeah.
I don't think that Peter would have wanted all that money to go to the club. Certain amount, yes, certainly, but certainly not a vast amount. I think he would have put his family first. Well, I'm sure he would have done.
You generally wouldn't find that sort of young people tend to sort of bequeath assets to their parents. It usually goes to the sort of same generation or outside, because you always assume that you'll outlive your parents. And of course Pete, I suppose when he made the will, he wasn't intending to die. He perhaps thought it would never happen for years to come.
He obviously knew that we don't own our own house. This is a council house, and we're both old age pensioners. The money would have given us a very comfortable retirement.
With her husband suffering from a weak heart, it was left to Mrs. Allen to spearhead the family's campaign. The club was sympathetic to their situation, but equally determined to stand up for what they believed Peter wanted.
We could have said, okay, fine, let's just walk away and leave it all, but that would have been very hard to justify doing, particularly to Pete's close friends in the rugby club, people who knew what his wishes were. It would be very difficult for me to turn around and say, well, okay, that's what Pete wanted, but it's an easy option. Let's end up with a few quid and have a couple of drinks on behalf of Pete, and let's go for that. We couldn't have done that.
Before both sides squared up for a fight over the money, an attempt was made to reach an amicable solution.
I actually had a meeting one evening with Paul Allen, that's Pete's brother, who was the executor of the will. We had quite a long meeting, and it was quite heated at times, and we exchanged our views, and fair enough. At the end of it, we came to a compromise, which I thought we came to a compromise. Basically, by splitting the big legacy 50-50, then that's fine, everybody was happy.
Get up, Jim! Get up, Jim!
We did try and negotiate with Salcombe Rugby Club. We've tried several times, and we'd started very low prices, and it gradually went up and up.
When I actually heard from the club solicitors that we were getting no further forward with the compromise, it was a mixture of disappointment. I thought we got everything wrapped up and put to bed, and also really frustration, really. We could see that all that was going to happen is that it would drag on month after month. We'd probably end up going to court, and most of the money would end up going in legal fees. It was quite apparent that that's what was going to happen.
It was now 3 years since Peter's death, and still no agreement had been reached over his will. As the increasingly bitter dispute headed for the courts, it also took its toll on the health of Peter's father.
Unfortunately, my husband was sent over the top. He's not a fit man. He's had heart problems for something like 25 years. But the thought of going to the High Court absolutely horrified him. He said, I'm not going, you know. Well, what do you want to go for? I said, I'm going, I'm jolly well going to go, you know. And Paul, the executor, said the same, you see. But unfortunately, he had a massive stroke just a matter of, 2 months before we went to court. He's paralysed, he can't talk, he could do nothing for himself, and he lives in a nursing home.
In March this year, 3 years after Peter's death, the case finally came to court in Bristol. Unless the two sides could agree, it would be left to the judge to decide who should get the cash.
The annoying part was that when we got to court, they started negotiating.
We were approached outside the doors of the court by, I think it was Mrs. Allen's solicitors, barrister, sorry, and wanted to talk about doing a deal.
Having dug my heels in before, or rather as a family we dug our heels in, we were advised not to, because my barrister said, "Do you realise if you continue to go on like this, you will end up with nothing."
In the corridors of the court, a final attempt was made to settle.
Particularly during the morning that we were at court, there were times when I thought that, no, we've done our best to try and reach a compromise. We've been pushed and pushed and pushed all along to accept something that we didn't want to. And there were times, yeah, during that morning that I thought, no, we really ought to go into court. Have our say in court, let the judge decide.
The two sides haggled for hours before the deal was finally struck. The estate would bear all the legal costs of the case, more than £30,000. The remainder of the money would be split in half. After inheritance tax, each side would receive about £85,000.
We didn't like it, but it's something we had to accept. It's either that or we come away with nothing, which could have happened had we gone on and on and on.
The club too had mixed feelings about taking the money.
I was happy to accept that on behalf of the club. To be honest, I was a bit disgusted at the time that we'd actually gone full circle after all the hard work, the arguing, the hassle, the stress that it caused to everybody, not just myself, not just the club, but to the family, to everybody involved, and we come back to exactly the same settlement that was, or agreement that was reached some time ago.
I'm glad it's come to an end. It's gone on far too long. No, I don't think justice is being done, but it was better than nothing. Whether Peter would approve of what they've done, who knows? I think he would have been quite horrified of what's been going on.
Shortly after Peter's death, his parents presented the club with a cup to be played for in his memory. But it's only been played for once, before the fight over his will destroyed the relationship between family and club.
I think at some time in the future, it would be nice that we restart this fixture and see the teams running out onto the pitch together in memory of Pete Allen, and I would like to think that his family will be here to see that as well.
No, I don't want to go anywhere near them. I hope I never meet any of them, to be quite honest. I shall never forgive them for what they've put the family through and for how it's affected my husband's health. No way. No, I don't want to go back.
Whilst his mother fought over what Peter's will meant, one man's troubles began because his partner didn't leave a will at all.
They think they're doing the right thing, I know, but I don't think they realise just what they've done, you know, how it looks.
November 1999, and it's a year since David Keeling died from emphysema. Enzo Ferreri, his partner of 20 years, and his cousin Paul Hilson have come to Wrexham Cemetery to intern his ashes. When David died, Enzo's life fell apart.
I was destroyed. I thought the entire world turned upside down for me. I couldn't think straight. I was crying all the time. It's not undescribable. David went everything for me.
Let us commend our brother David into the hands of God, our Maker and Redeemer. We commend to thy name.
David worshipped the ground that Enzo walked on. Enzo was his life, and vice versa. It was obvious to anybody who knew them properly, who really knew them, that they loved each other deeply, and David deeply loved Enzo.
We commend to thy merciful keeping David, our brother, through Jesus Christ, thy Son, our Lord. Amen.
Amongst David's relatives, Paul has given Enzo particular support, but his bereavement has been made worse because David left behind no will.
Maybe it's a British thing, I don't know, but people just don't like to think that they're going to die. And so I'll do it tomorrow, like David did. But sometimes tomorrow doesn't come.
Enzo moved from his home in Italy to London in 1974 and met David within weeks. They fell in love immediately.
He was a nice guy, he was charming, and he was amusing, chatty, and a great sense of humour, a very great sense of humour.
Back in Wales, David's first cousin Margaret, with whom he'd grown up, suspected he'd met someone special.
He kept mentioning this person called Enzo. And then I said, when are we going to meet this Enzo? And so he said, oh, you'll meet her, just like that. And I said to him, David, are you gay? And he went, yeah. And that was it, you know, he was just totally open.
David and Enzo bought a flat in London and lived together, sharing the household expenses. While Enzo went from one job to the next, David worked his way up in the post office.
David was never rich, we both had never any money. We had a mortgage for £52,000. We just struggled through and managed.
Although David didn't have much, he knew that his post office pension would pay out when he died, and he knew he should make a will to protect Enzo, but he never got round to it.
He was always sort of putting things off till tomorrow. I used to moan at him about his smoking. Oh, well, I was thinking about giving that up tomorrow, you know. You don't look too good. Have you been to the doctor? Oh, I'm going to go tomorrow. He's that type of person. Everything. He was so laid back. He was unbelievable.
In 1998, aged 51, David's chronic asthma worsened, and he was forced to take early retirement. He decided that he wanted to go home and live in Wrexham, and rented a flat in the same close as his cousin Paul.
He just wanted to be near his family and closer to the roots where he came from. I think he got fed up of London, got a bit tired, and the hustle and bustle, I think, has got too much for him.
David asked Enzo to move with him, but Enzo wasn't convinced he'd get a job in Wales and was keen to feel more financially secure before taking the plunge. They sold their house, making a little profit, and Enzo stayed in London, lodging with a friend.
We both got very upset. I'd never seen David crying before, and he was in tears, just because we never lived apart, we've always been together.
One couldn't live without the other. David was pining in Wrexham, Enzo was pining down there, but Enzo wanted to get his life in order first before he made the move to Wrexham. David was aware of that, David knew that, and that's why he was prepared to wait for him.
Redoubling his efforts, Enzo took on 2 jobs. Crossing London every day from his office job to an evening shift at Tesco. Then at weekends he was commuting 200 miles to see David and look for a job in Wrexham.
So I used to finish work, pack my bag and drive up to Wales and early in the morning, long drive.
One weekend about 6 months after he moved to Wales, David asked Enzo to rush up and see him. Aware of his worsening health, he was finally thinking seriously about making a will.
To me there was something strange about him. Something was wrong there. I couldn't figure it out. On Sunday I took a drive and I said to stop there. And he was told me about his will. He said that he wanted to make me his next of kin and give some to his families. In that moment I said to him, why are you telling me this? I said, is there something which you're not telling me? He said he didn't have no intention of dying yet.
On Sunday night, Enzo returned reluctantly to London, more worried about David's health than his will.
Well, I think I heard it was on a Monday afternoon. I got a call that David was found dead.
Enzo arranged the cremation in Wrexham a few days later. All David's family were invited, including his nearest blood relatives, his niece and nephew.
The first time I seen his niece and nephew was on the day of the funeral. And they were really, you know, feeling sad for Enzo and saying to Enzo, don't you worry, you'll be all right, you know.
Despite what he told Enzo, David had left no will to confirm his intentions. Because he died intestate, by law, everything was now due to go to his nearest relatives, his niece and nephew.
I called him a few times, left messages, all sorts of things. What happened from then? I couldn't believe it.
A few weeks after David's death, their solicitors asked Enzo for his possessions.
The Rotters, my solicitor, demanding the key from the flat was, where is the rest of the stuff from the flat? I was annoyed about that because there was none of the stuff has got nothing to do with them. It was 20 years of our life together.
Enzo returned to London, determined to find out if he had any legal claim on David's estate. He arranged a meeting with a new solicitor, Ali Mulsha.
When I first met Enzo, he was deeply upset. He really wasn't sure what the legal position was. He wasn't sure even what the family were going to do.
David's post office pension came to over £45,000, which was payable as a lump sum on his death. He also had some savings, and Enzo felt he was entitled to at least some of David's money.
David always used to say I'd be worth more dead than alive. He was going to get a really good pension from the post office, which he'd worked for years. I didn't expect him to leave any of the family any money because it was all for Enzo.
But this was not to be. British inheritance law doesn't recognise gay relationships at all.
It's an old law. I mean, these rules were designed in the 1920s. They're way out of date now. Society has changed. People have changed. The nature of relationships have changed. And they're not recognised. These relationships are just not recognised in law.
If Enzo had been a woman and had lived with David for more than 2 years, he could have made a claim on David's estate. But as a gay man, even though he'd lived with him for 20, he could only make a claim if he'd been financially dependent on David, which wasn't the case.
It was important to him to have his independence, despite the fact they were part of a loving couple. And because of that, we couldn't establish that there was a financial detriment.
Although the law didn't recognise their relationship, David's old employer, the post office, did, and awarded Enzo a discretionary widow's pension of £340 a month.
The post office acted very well in the circumstances. They decided that he was entitled to the dependency pension and they awarded it.
But the discretionary pension was all that Enzo would receive. Ali had to break the news to him that he had no legal claim on any of David's estate.
Enzo was very disappointed to hear the news, and despite the fact that he had advice saying it's not possible to pursue this, it's really very, very difficult to pursue this, you're not going to win, he really still wanted to go on.
I just wanted to fulfill David's wish, what he told me, what he wanted in the car, and that's what I really wanted to do.
There has to be a cut-off point emotionally when you say, I can't take any more, I can't do any more, I've done what I could do. And I said to him in the end that he had done more than David could have expected, and that was all he could do.
6 months on, and Enzo, sidelined by the law, is trying to piece his life back together without David. The niece and nephew have received their legal inheritance.
They think they're doing the right thing, I know, but I don't think they realise just what they've done, you know, how it looks.
If David is looking down on us, he'd be bloody angry right now. He would never have wanted to see Enzo in this situation. He would never have seen Enzo get this upset.
David wanted to be in Wrexham. I think that was his wish to be there. And that's why I buried him. I think at least that one wish I fulfilled for him.
Enzo's been left with nothing because David left no will. A Birmingham family were left with nothing, but for a very different reason.
I couldn't understand why we could not all get round a table and agree.
John Spring used to like a flutter on the dogs.
It was a way of relaxing. He'd come to the dogs and he'd sit and look at the dogs running around, and he just, you know, just to build up of the atmosphere, the excitement. And we'd have a meal together, and he'd put a bet on, and usually he's very good at picking the winners because he'd win.
But he could never have predicted the result of the will he wrote a year before his death. His 6 children pursued their inheritance for more than a decade. And for some of them, the race is still being run. John Spring worked hard to build up a successful insurance business in Birmingham. He had a large family to support, 5 sons and a daughter. As a widower in his late 70s, he met Violet Shakespeare. She started as his housekeeper, but the relationship soon blossomed into something more.
My father was on his own for quite a little time, and Violet then became his companion and looked after him and eventually moved in with him, which I personally fully approved of because she was a very caring lady.
I know that John approached Violet to get married, but she thought it was stupid because of their ages and didn't need a piece of paper to say we're in love. And I think John just accepted that as being, that's okay, that's fine. And it was never sort of mentioned again.
In 1986, 4 years after meeting Violet, John became seriously ill. Violet contacted his family, who were scattered over the globe.
We'd actually just flown from London out to Saudi Arabia via Cyprus when we got the phone call that my father had had a heart attack. So whereupon I then turned around and went back to Larnaca, got on a plane again and went back to London, and I was with my father. He, you know, lived for another week or so, and was with him when he died. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go to the funeral because I'd left my wife and children stranded on the island of Cyprus, so I had to go back there to be with them.
Whilst William travelled back to Cyprus, the rest of the family gathered to hear the reading of the will.
The solicitor came in with my father's will and sat behind the desk. Everybody settled down and were fortified by a wee dram. And the will was then read.
The will made various bequests to family and friends, but it didn't say what should happen to the main asset of the estate, the family home in Birmingham.
I was very surprised that the house wasn't mentioned. I can't understand it because he was an insurance broker and he was a businessman as well, and I'm really surprised that the house wasn't included in the will.
I'm not sure that that wasn't possibly my father's wish, and he would have known, I believe, that in that situation it would go to the legitimate heirs, that is, myself, my 4 brothers and my sister.
At this point, the estate was worth about £120,000, but before the children could receive their share, the house had to be sold, which meant a decision had to be taken about how long Violet should stay there. Friends of John Spring had no doubts about what his wishes were.
He did say to me that the house, he'd left the house for Violet to live in until she'd passed away.
We were all in general agreement that Violet could stay there for as long as she wished, or as was necessary.
The executors also suggested that they use money from the estate to pay Violet's bills while she remained in the house. But when news of this reached the 2 brothers living abroad, Ray in New Zealand and William in Saudi Arabia, they were less than pleased.
I had no objection to her staying in the house, but for a period. But I did have an objection to all the bills, including a telephone bills, being paid for by the estate, because I felt, well, she was already getting a rent-free house.
My brothers were arguing about silly things like telephone bills and so on, you know, very small amounts of money, all very, very petty, but blown up into big issues. I couldn't understand it. I really could not understand it.
I think that they thought that Violet may have been trying to sponge on them, and I think they thought, you know, enough's enough. We need our inheritance, and she had got to go. But I don't think she ever did that. It wasn't in her nature to do that.
Whilst the argument over the house rumbled on, Violet was still trying to come to terms with John's death.
She said to me that sometime when she's setting the table for supper, she'd find herself setting for 2 people because she felt as though John was there. So I think she needed time, really, to get over that process before moving out, but I don't think she got to that stage.
Violet became increasingly depressed and unhappy that her presence in the house was causing this controversy.
I suggested that she should stay for a further period, but she just wanted to go as quick as she could physically go.
Eventually, the argument with Violet was settled. She moved out of the house, and it was sold soon afterwards.
We expected that once the sale of the house had gone through, that we would just walk away from it, and that would be the end. Never to hear anything about John Spring again. But as it turned out to be, it wasn't to be.
I sort of had that feeling that these things, you know, things wouldn't go right after that. You know, he seemed as if he was sort of up there, looking down, smiling, and thought, right, well, you know, I'll put a curse on you all. If you can't have it my way, then you don't have it at all.
3 years had passed since John Spring's death, and the remains of his estate were finally ready for distribution. But then a new problem arose. Some of the family, including William and Raymond, believed that the administration of the will had been mishandled.
We both came in for a lot of insults about mismanagement, and that's when things started to get nasty. Obviously the children felt that we'd acted incorrectly at this point in time. But as an executor, we'd only taken advice off our solicitor anyway.
In effect, William and Raymond went into dispute now with the solicitors, saying that they had not administered the estate properly and correctly.
From the start, the solicitors also wholly denied these allegations. But to protect the executors from any legal action over the dispute, the family were asked to sign an indemnity. This would mean, in effect, that they were agreeing to take over responsibility should the handling of the will be challenged in the future. And unless every member of the family signed the indemnity, no one would get any money.
This here is the indemnity that they wanted us to sign. It's really a remarkable document. It says, "And I hereby discharge the executors and indemnify them against all claims and demands, costs and expenses, howsoever arising in respect of the estate." So it's absolutely unsignable document, isn't it?
I was asked to sign the indemnity. I had no problem with that. But because others who were also direct relations and beneficiaries on the will, because they would not sign the indemnity, the argument went on. It just went on and on.
Of the 6 brothers and sisters, only Derek had agreed to sign the indemnity, so no money was paid out. From his home in New Zealand, Raymond, backed by William, decided on a new and high-risk strategy.
What do you do when you lawyers don't give you your money? Well, the answer is if someone doesn't give you your money, you sue.
The solicitors had to go to court on a number of occasions to get a ruling that what they were actually proposing to do was legally correct. But obviously every time they went to court, they were paying for a judge to make that decision. So the money was slowly being eroded away out of the estate.
It seems inherently wrong that other people, and I class my brothers in this respect, other people can spend your money, because this is in effect what happened.
When the solicitors asked the High Court for advice on ending the dispute, it was suggested they should replace their original indemnity with one more acceptable to the family. William and the others who had refused to sign the first indemnity agreed to sign the new one. But by now, the arguments over the will had dragged on for 9 years, and the value of the estate had fallen significantly.
All we wanted to do was cut our losses and get out of it. We thought, well, we'll argue about all the money the lawyers have taken later, but let's just get something which is signable, which doesn't compromise us too much, and get out of it.
At last a breakthrough had been made. Because all John's children had now signed an indemnity, the court wrote to the solicitors to say that the money could finally be paid out.
I said to my children, well, things are, however late in the day, we should be all right now.
By now, William was in desperate need of the money because his wife Isabel had just been diagnosed with breast cancer.
We were in very acute financial circumstances because of my wife's illness. So the money was necessary, and it was late. It should have come earlier, but at least we now knew it was coming. But it wasn't. It didn't come. So that was the situation. It was very, very difficult.
One of the main reasons for the delay was a problem with the solicitor's accounts, which showed what each member of the family should receive from the estate after legal costs. The court asked for a new set to be drawn up, but these revealed that William's share had now fallen from £12,000 to just £4,800.
By this time, when it got down to 4,000, one felt, might as well get the case go to court. And we pressed for the matter to go to trial, because it was clear there was no way we were going to sort anything out before then.
10 years after John Spring's death, his family went to court to fight for the money they believed was due to them. The battle over his will was about to reach its dramatic conclusion.
My wife's condition was deteriorating. She was in hospital. She didn't want me actually to go up to Birmingham at all. I said, well, in the end, I said to her, look, I can't just not go at all. I'll go for one day. I remember when I was actually travelling to the court, I thought, well, this is at least the end of a saga. This is open and shut.
The case lasted 3 days. William gave evidence on the first day, then returned to his wife's bedside in London, where he waited to hear the verdict.
My brother, Ray, phoned me and said, we've lost. As simple as that.
The judge criticised the executors for asking the family to sign the original indemnity, but said the solicitors had acted properly in their handling of the will and the charges made for their work. His main blame was saved for Raymond and William, who he said had caused the litigation by their refusal to accept the final accounts and their criticism of the solicitors. The family was ordered to pay all the legal costs, wiping out the remains of their father's estate.
When Ray phoned me, I was by that time so deeply involved in the emotional stress of Isabel and family that I didn't have any feelings anymore, you know, just sort of dumb resignation, you know.
I thought the judge had summed up and got the absolute balance right, that it really was Raymond and Williams' fault, their intransigent position and right from the very off, the way they were thinking, that they had in fact brought all of it on themselves, and the judge made that quite clear.
I think we did everything that was reasonable and right, and at the end of the day, that's what my father would have wanted us to do. Doing what's reasonable and right however, was a mistake. You know, it was a mistake.
£120,000, all the money from their father's estate, had now been lost. For Derek, it was time to draw a line under the whole affair.
The human cost of all this, the stress and the strains and the roller coaster emotions and so forth, has really been as costly as the financial side of it, the fact that the whole of the estate was dissipated.
In December 1996, just a few weeks after the case in Birmingham, William's wife Isabel died. But his fight against those he blamed for the loss of his father's estate continued.
I wasn't prepared to let go. I thought, well, we'll fight it out to the bitter end. You know, that's why the first thing that came to my mind was we must appeal it.
William was refused permission to appeal. 2 years later, he tried to sue the solicitors. Again, he was unsuccessful. But he still blames the legal profession for the family conflicts fought over his father's will.
The rules of this game that the lawyers have, the game is divide and rule, you see. So you've got the money. You know that the family all want it. You know that if you don't give it to them, they'll all come, you know, squabble over different strategies how to get it. Particularly if you can set one member of the family against another, this is even better for you, because then you can just sort of sit back and watch this little game being played out.
William is still a regular visitor to the courts. He's now trying to rally public support against the system he believes has robbed him of his inheritance.
My father died, 16 years ago, and the lawyers have taken the loot. And these people in there haven't done a thing. It's about my father's, well, it's about wills, basically. My father left a will.
William's allegations have been rejected repeatedly by the courts. He now faces legal bills of more than £20,000, the same figure he originally expected to receive from his father's will.
That was the last in the series of Battle of Wills. Next Thursday at 8 o'clock, a remarkable story of survival against all the odds in The Children Who Cheated the Nazis. Next tonight, Secret History looks at the paralysing virus that ravaged Britain in the 40s and 50s, polio, in Children of the Iron Lung.